Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is Enthusiastical History. You are listening to our new bonus episode, Honor, War, and Warbands. In this episode, we are going to talk about honor, war, and warbands, as you can tell from the title. As you know, in our last episode, King Athelfrid of Northumbria asked Redwold to give up Edwin, a prince of Deira who is a dynastic rival of Athelfrid, and Redwold almost agreed, but at the very last moment his queen interfered, and I quote from Bede again. Then she diverted him from the evil purpose of his heart, instructing and admonishing him that it in no wise became a king so noble and so excellent to sell for gold his best friend in the hour of his need, and to sacrifice honor, which is dearer than all treasures, for greed and love of money. Redwold was thus convinced to go to war. Now, obviously, this wasn't the only reason. Honor wasn't the only reason. He had political interests in defeating Athelfrid, but Athelfrid, as we've said, was a force to be reckoned with. He wasn't a guy to be messed with. So it must have been a hard choice for Redwold. And honor, although may not be the sole reason for his attack on Athelfrid, was an important reason because honor really did matter in Anglo-Saxon culture. Honor meant a lot for an Anglo-Saxon soldier, let alone a king. A man without honor was no better than a dead man. But again, here we have to set aside our current understanding of the concept of honor if we are to really understand these Anglo-Saxon guys and what honor was to them. Honor wasn't about doing the morally right thing or being kind or being just. No, being an honorful man simply meant that you would stay true to your word. And this meant a lot to these people because it was an illiterate world that they lived in. There was no writing, so they couldn't just sign a contract and be done with it. No, they had to make promises. They had to make oaths. That's how the world went. That's how the world worked back then. And so a man who didn't stay true to his words, who broke oaths, was not a man that you could trust your life with. And a king who broke his word, who gave away someone who sought refuge in him for gold, for money, or for fear of enemies, would be a king without honor, and certainly not a guy you would like to follow. And yes, you had the choice to follow a king or not follow him. Because back then, kings didn't really have subjects. No, again, that's a concept that developed later into history. But in this era, the kings didn't have subjects; they had followers. These people would follow their lords or kings, hoping that they will be rewarded in exchange for their services. It was essentially a contract between the lord and the follower. A warrior would give his oath to a lord and therefore give him the promise of loyalty and of service, and thus become his oathman. But the lord had responsibilities too. The oath lord, would have to provide for his oathman. He would have to win battles. He would have to gain them loot and land and women, and he would have to feed them and so on. And if a lord was not successful, the oathman would desert him, looking for another lord. So the oath lords, had to be successful in order to keep their oathman with them, and nobody cared how they did it, so long as they were successful. Remember how I said that honor for these men wasn't about doing the morally right thing, wasn't about being just. Well, quite the opposite, actually. Cunning was an important skill to be found in an Anglo-Saxon lord. In one of our source books, Northumbria, the Lost Kingdom, the author describes Athelfrid this way, and I quote, "Such a man was not likely to be overly troubled by questions of probity, honor, or chivalry. This pretty much epitomized the pagan Anglo-Saxon ideal of a warrior chief. and men who won battles by fair means or foul, disposed of rivals with threats, poison, or treachery, and doled out the winnings to his followers. In many ways, the comparison with a modern day mob boss is closer than a comparison with our modern ideas of kingship, influenced as they are by 1,000 years of Christian and philosophical refining. That is a most brilliant description of an Anglo-Saxon warlord, a cunning man who won, however he might have done it. And as these warlords kept winning battles, more people would come to join them to give them their oaths and thus become their oathsmen. And these oathsmen would form the Lord's Warband. I specifically chose the word warband over army because if I said army, if you were to hear the word army, you will think of a big host, you'll think of 1,000 men, but the war bands were much smaller. They had like anywhere between 10 to 200, 300 men. As I said in the first bonus episode of the series, if you had like 300 men in your war band, you were a really, really important person in this era. But as I've said earlier, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but do not let that small number fool you, because these men were warriors. They were raised to kill. They were raised to be butchers. They were professional and very, very effective. The warriors in Anglo-Saxon society was a different class. They weren't like the common people, and they didn't live together with the common people. Warriors were separated from the normal society. These warriors lived with their comrades. They would sleep together, they would wake up together, eat together, train together, and train they would. They would train on a daily basis, they would practice warfare, and when they were not practicing, they would still do things somewhat related to military skills. They would, for example, hunt game. One of the animals they hunted frequently was wild boars, and those of you who grew up in rural areas will know just how ferocious these creatures are. Even if you didn't see one, which is very lucky for you if you didn't see one, would have heard stories of wild boars from your elders. And for those of you who don't know what a wild boar is and how strong it can be, I'm going to show you a video, or perhaps a couple of videos, I haven't decided yet, and then we will continue. Now you saw that boar, right? Well, imagine him running at you at full speed, because that's what's going to happen, because hunting a boar required teamwork. Men would surround the boar and they would make noise and scare the wild boar to where they wanted him to go, and in the place, in the designated place, a warrior, a man, would be waiting with a spear in his hand, and he would have to wait for the boar to come to him, and when the boar was running straight at him, he would have to lunge his spear and pierce the boar either in throat or in belly, and drive it deep enough to take the boar's life. And boars are really hard creatures to kill, need I remind you. So yeah, this creature is running at you full speed, and you have to lunge and pierce his thick skin and kill him. And that was precisely how the warfare worked in this era. You had to launch your spear, drive it deep enough to shatter the mail your enemy wore, and go deep into his body to spill his groins on the ground. Except that the men won't be running at you, so it will be a harder job to do. As you can see, these men weren't like us, men of modern society. They were hardy, bloodthirsty warriors raised from their childhood to kill. They were slaughterers, they were killing machines. And these killing machines, once the night fell, would get into a hall, huddle around their hearth, or if they're outside, around the campfire, and start exchanging stories. They will drink their ale and listen to stories told by bards, stories of great battles, stories of mythical heroes like that one of Beowulf. They will be crying out with emotion as the story of Beowulf was being told. They would praise and they would roar as Beowulf slayed the dragon, and then they would get emotional and perhaps start crying as Beowulf, not being able to withstand his wounds, fell and died. These stories were really important for these men because back then there weren't many sources of entertainment like there is today. So for these people, stories were all there was to entertain themselves in the long nights. The stories like that of Beowulf weren't the only ones that were being told. These men would tell their own stories as well. They would talk about their experiences and they would boast of their great achievements. They would boast of their prowess, of the men they have killed. They'll be telling stories like, once the guy against me fell from a lunge of my sword. The man behind him took his place. He was a huge man, a brute of a Briton. His face was painted and looked horrific, like that of a monster. He lifted his big battle axe as he was shouting a war cry in his weird tongue. I knew he would hook my shield with his axe and pull it down to let his shield neighbor kill me, so I had to act quick. As his axe was coming down, I took a step back, let it fall into empty space, and then cut his throat with Widowmaker, my sword, which made many a Briton woman widows. Yes, back then swords had names. They were important things. There was a special bond between the sword and its user. So much so that men would name their swords, and swords would have their own stories, they would have their own fame. Warriors would boast of their ancestral swords, like my great 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 grandfather Ida used this sword when he landed in the shores of Amber and captured that place. But the tales of swords and wars and slaughter weren't the only things that were being told. There would be other stories, more, how shall I say it? There would be more civilian stories being told, such as those of whores and prostitutes. For example, I've heard men say that in London Fleet there's a new whore with fair hair, a skin not scarred by disease or beating, and tits big enough to rival a cow. And people would laugh or they would fancy seeing that whore. And by telling these stories and by living together all their life, these men would create a bond that is not easily created and not seen much elsewhere. And they really needed to form that bond if they were to stay alive, because the warfare technique of the era required men to be next to each other and to protect one another. So now we're going to talk about war, and particularly shield walls. So what was a shield wall? Well, a shield wall, to put it simply, was a wall of shields. Yeah, it's interesting, right? You didn't expect that, totally not. And you can see a recreation of a shield wall in the picture that should be on the screen right now. This isn't a perfect recreation, but it's just there to give you an idea, to let you see how it looks, how a shield wall more or less looks. Now, the soldiers, the warriors, would hold their shields up and they would overlap their shields with their shield neighbors. And once all the warriors did this in the front rank, well, they would form a shield wall and they would go into battle in this formation. Both sides would form their shield walls and then they would start marching. They would meet each other and one of the sides, or sometimes both, would charge and they would fight in this formation. If a man on the front line fell, the man behind him in the second line would take his place, and thus the battle, would keep going on until one of the two sides broke, and then slaughter would begin. So yeah, to put it simply, this is what a shield wall was and how the battle in this formation worked. It was a struggle of men pushing forward and then being pushed back, and all the while trying to find this empty space to attack, to lunge and spill the groins of their enemy, or to hit them in their feet, and so on and so forth. And it was really, really personal, because you would have to get up close to your enemy to be able to hit him. And this was, really, I mean, it was as personal as it gets in warfare. You would see your enemy, you would see his eyes, you look into his eyes, you would even smell the ale in his breath, and he would probably stink a lot, but so would you. And you would have to kill him. So we will have to give the Anglo-Saxons that, we kept likening them to mafia bosses, but one thing they differed in is that while mafia guys just shoot their enemies with a pistol, these guys had to actually go into trouble of killing them, of murdering them. And it was a horrible place to be in, these shield walls. Bernard Cornwell, who I mentioned previously, the author of Saxon Stories, describes the shield wall as lover's embrace. And I think that's a perfect naming for the thing, because it was really the lover's embrace. It was like the embrace of lovers. And I'm going to now quote from one of our source books, Northumbria, the Lost Kingdom, to let you have a better idea, because I think they describe it better than I ever could. And I quote: Imagine your body pressed against another man, his breath hot on your face, his body pushing back, while to either side your comrades squeeze in against you as the whole line sways and surges in constant dynamic motion. This is about as intimate a physical contact with another human being as is possible outside the marriage bed. But the man you are pushing against is trying to kill you, and you are trying to kill him. So, as I said, it was a horrific business. It was a horrific job to do, but you had to do it. And now I'm going to quote again, this time from Bernard Cornwell, the author of Saxon Stories, who I've already quoted from previously in our other bonus episode. And you'll be hearing his name a lot, because he's both a brilliant author and novelist, and also an Anglo-Saxon historian. So I like quoting from him. He really explains the concepts and situations in a way that I cannot hope to explain. So here we go. Quote: 30 paces, 20, and you can see the eyes of the men who will try to kill you, and see the spear blades. And the instinct is to stop, to straighten the shields. We cringe from battle. Fear claws at us. Time seems to stop. There is silence, though 1,000 men shout. And at that moment, when terror savages the heart like a trapped beast, you must hurl yourself into the horror, because the enemy feels the same, and you have come to kill him. You are the beast from his nightmares. And now I think you understand how a shield wall worked. I hope that you understand it, because all those things I've talked about in this episode, honor, warbands, oaths, oathmen, outlaws, and so on, all of these concepts led to one thing and one thing only: the shield wall, the battle, the clash of shield walls. And I think I've done a good job at explaining what the shield wall was and how it, happened, how it went. But just to enhance your experience, I'm going to show you footage from a game called Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, and I'm going to try to emulate a shield wall there. It's not going to be totally accurate, because I can't control what the AI does, and AI is often stupid in such games. That being said, it's going to be enough to help you visualize the whole process and get a better understanding. So let's open the game. Okay, I've launched the game and set up a shield wall to show you. Let's see. Okay, the enemy is still far. So these guys will, these warriors, this warband will form a line like this. Their shields should be touching each other, but you know, we have to work with this game. It's not the best representation, but okay, let's forget about it. So in the front line there will be men without spears. These spears are immersion breaking, but imagine that instead of spears these men had seaxes, which is a name for short swords. So they would have short swords in their hands, and the men in the second line would have spears, and they would lunge in between these spaces to hopefully, you know, hurt the enemy army. They would want to hurt the enemy warriors, like stab their feet, or you know, just be a nuisance in general. And there would also be men with axes who will attack the shield specifically and hook their axes into the shield and then pull down to create an opening for the other men to strike with their short axes. And anyways, the enemy are coming. They're getting really close. So this is what a shield will look like. I'm going to change to third person so you can see better. And now we're going to take our place in the center of the shield wall as the leader. And yeah, javelins will be exchanged. Javelins throwing axes. These were thrown not to hurt the people, not to kill, but rather to make it harder to use the shields, because the shields with javelins are harder, but forget about it, let's fight. You know how I was talking about how you could see the enemy's eyes and feel their breaths? You can see just how close we are. This guy is owning me with his huge axe, you can see. And there we go. This is how it looked like. Now, this is not how it exactly looked like, because the enemy didn't come in formation, and our men broke formation as soon as they engaged the enemy. But in reality, they will keep the shield walls much more firm, and they will keep fighting until one of the two sides broke, at which point the slaughter will begin. I'm going to get a little bit closer and okay, I'm going to shut up and just let you enjoy, let you watch and see for yourselves. So yeah, I think this is enough to give you an idea of how a shield wall battle happens. And these guys will fight until one of the two walls fall, until one of the walls break. Well, there are no walls really in this game, but just imagine that there are walls. So they will fight, and once you know one of them breaks and starts retreating, starts running away, the real slaughter will begin, and the other side will be victorious. So this is more or less how Redwold and Ethelfrid will fight in our next episode. I hope you've enjoyed. Okay, I can make the speech in honesty. Yeah, it could be better. And that's all for this episode. Honor, War, and Warband. I've picked these three concepts because I think them essential to understand the story better as we keep going on. And I hope that I've done a good job at talking about them, and I hope that I've managed to help you understand these concepts a little bit better, if anything. And yeah, that is all. If you have any questions, if you're wondering about anything, feel free to ask me, whether you do it in the comments or by a message in WhatsApp or Instagram. It doesn't really matter. Feel free to ask me anything you didn't understand, or source books and all that stuff. Anyways, thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned, because within this week we will be having another bonus episode. This time we're going to talk about the post-Roman Europe, politics, religion, and specifically Franks. Until then, take care.